Welcome to the Herland Report, Kari Jaquesson.
Thank you.
You are a Norwegian fitness and lifestyle coach, famous in Scandinavia for all the TV programs you've made over the years. And you are a most remarkable woman, I would say, because you've done something really unusual. You have gone to Syria and visited Syria. What was the reason behind your traveling there?
Well, it wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. I have been interested in politics most of my life, most of my adult life, and I've also been a goodwill ambassador for the UNFPA. I've been active in organization for sexual and reproductive rights. I've been fighting for environment. So my heart is an activist's heart. And when I saw the media coverage of the crisis in Syria, I recognized the recipe. It's the same recipe that I've seen being used on the Balkan conflict, in Iraq, Libya. And I said to myself, there are some voices that we're not hearing. Where are the majority of the Syrians? All we saw was images from so-called rebel-held areas, and it seemed very biased, and I decided to go and see for myself.
It's a problem in the West, and world-known linguist Noam Chomsky has spoken extensively about this, that the US is no longer a democracy. It's an oligarchy because power is concentrated in the hands of the very few, and what they decide very often go against also the national will. In the United States, 74% of the population, according to public policy polling, are against a new war. That particular instant it was Iraq war, and still we see the military complex, let's say, in the United States, which President Eisenhower warned so much against in 1961 when he held his speech, saying that if the military complex gets its way with democracy, democracy will erode and will have a strong capitalist elite who will, in the name of globalization, take power away from the people in the Western world. It seems today that the Western media go hand in hand almost completely with this group. We know in the United States also over 90% of the media is owned by 6 media corporations, and they're all like intermingled into each other's boards. So it seems to me that Noam Chomsky is somehow correct in stating that there's something going on in the Western media structures that doesn't allow us to get the whole picture anymore.
Yeah, but that's true. They try to do that, but we must never believe that we don't have a power, that we don't have the power. The people do have the power. But to have power, you have to organize yourself. You have to be organized, and we have to believe in that everyone can do something. Not everyone can do everything, but we can all do something. And one of the most important things is to get informed. That can be difficult because you don't really know how to evaluate different news sources. Let's say on the internet, there are a lot of strange things you can find, but there are also quite serious news outlets on the net. And it's very important to keep an open mind and to think for yourself. But we are being programmed, and it might take some time to be deprogrammed. For example, after coming back from Syria and giving another perspective that's not in line with the public, let's say, accepted narrative, I've had a lot of resistance from the press. People cheer. I've posted on Facebook to show the everyday life in Syria, and the ordinary public loves it. But the media have been very harsh. And of course, people who only read mainstream media, they are subject to a certain grade of a certain level of programmation, and you will feel a lot of discomfort when you are being exposed to another perspective, which, for example, I have presented. And I just hope people can just register that discomfort and get over it and open their mind and their ears, because when you hear something which is not in sync with what you've been told all the time, it is quite uncomfortable, actually.
I remember in the olden days, I'm born and raised in Africa, and I moved to Europe when I was older. And at that time, I mean, Kenya was in a wonderful state. I mean, all the different other countries such as Congo and Zambia, and everyone traveled, let's say, to Kenya to get their supplies and everything was working well. And then I came here, and this was at the end of, when the Berlin Wall fell.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, there was a quick demonization of all the dictators in Africa that the West had supported up to that point.
Yes.
Now they didn't need them anymore, so it was a quick shift there, and all of a sudden they were considered all evil. So to me, already at that point, I understood that the Western press is much more, again, to return to Chomsky, much more an echo chamber for political elites. Whatever is convenient within the political and economic elites is what the media speaks about. And there's a danger. In the olden days, we used to speak about the Soviet Union. We say they were so much behind the Iron Curtain. And it seems that many in the West now are waking up and understanding that, you know what, we're under an Iron Curtain as well. We're not being told the truth about Libya.
No.
We're not being told the truth about Syria.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And the contrast, I had been reading about Syria before going there, but still the surprise to see life, beauty, happiness, everyday encounters. It was so positive because I knew people were living their lives and so on, but to stand in the old city in Damascus and really see children going to school, parents holding their child by the hand, girls giggling, just ordinary people going about their daily life. It made me so happy. I was very moved. And at the same time, I got quite upset because these people don't exist in the Western media, hardly. And their voice is not heard. And what did they say? They all said the same thing. We just want our old life back. And, if you were to judge from the coverage, you would think that most of Syria is in ruins and that people are hurrying through the streets in the so-called regime-controlled areas. This is not true. There were checkpoints with soldiers here and there. But the soldiers were chatting with people, smiling, standing, smoking cigarettes together. It was quite obvious that there was no fear for the soldiers among these people. And then some might say, yeah, but that's because they're pro-regime. Well, I didn't ask them. I just saw that they were happy. And I think that it's quite representative that people aren't really that political. I mean, most people in most countries, they just want to go and buy their bread, have the kids to school. But in this crisis, the president has become the unifying symbol, even for people who used to oppose him.
That's quite a startling thing to see also to many in the West, to understand the extent of how the Christian minorities in countries like Syria support Bashar al-Assad.
Oh, absolutely.
And especially also because he's coming also from a minority perspective, and we know the Ba'athist system, how the nationality and the national Arab thought at that time when the Ba'athist parties came was a unifying force, saying everyone who lives in Syria, whether you are Shia, whether you are Sunni, whether you are Jewish or Christian, you are to be able to live here because these different groups,
Syrian.
They compose the beautiful Syrian mosaic.
Yes.
Syria is a several thousand-year-old culture. So,
yes.
But what can you tell us about the Christians? How?
Yeah, I met a few Christian leaders. By coincidence, I should have remembered his name, but there was just, by passing by the patriarch of one of the Orthodox churches, which was just in front of our hotel. I met the leader of the Presbyterian church in Aleppo. I met priests in Malula, where we went, which is the village where they still speak Aramaic, Jesus's language. I met the head nun in one of the monasteries there. And they all said the same thing. They said that, the thin wall between life and death for us Christians in Syria is our president and our government and our armed forces. Because For example, in Malula, they told us about how the terrorists were just actually people from the area, you know, thugs who had been doing stealing and smuggling. All of a sudden, they started with kidnappings. And then they came back with other people that were not from the, you know, not from the region, and maybe not even Syrians, starting to target Christians. They kidnapped nuns, they smashed all the icons in the churches, and these are really old churches. So they really targeted Christians. And it seems to me that if you are really fighting for democracy, as they claim, and they claim here in the West, why would you destroy national and religious symbols? It doesn't make any sense. So the Christian minority, which is still a big group, it's probably about 2 million Christians in Syria, they really support the president and the government, and the armed forces were actually their guarantee.
What I have found very strange is that the Arab Spring, of course, was hailed in all the Western newspapers. And what we ended up seeing was that radical Islamists, Wahhabis, extremists, were the ones that took over power in country after country. In Libya, we saw the Al-Qaeda flag waving over the Tripoli governmental buildings. In Egypt, of course, it was the Muslim Brotherhood, which was strongly supported by both Obama, Hillary Clinton at that time. And it has been such a strange thing to see how those we fought were actually the enemies of Al-Qaeda, let's put it that way. We fought against the moderate Muslims, people or leaders such as Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, who was a strong enemy against Al-Qaeda systems. And the same goes for Iraq at the time, really, when you look at Saddam Hussein and much of his secular views also. Homosexuality, for example, was not prohibited by law under Saddam Hussein, and there was prosperity in Iraq at the time prior to the sanctions and what happened next. And now we see Syria, also with Bashar al-Assad, secular, more secular. We see him being a moderate Muslim that wants to... I mean, why does the West side with much of the extremist forces?
Well, let's just start by saying that it's very immoral. What we are seeing is a very immoral strategy, because the only thing that I can find as a motive is greed. There can't be any other motive, because these countries that have been destroyed have actually complied to the principles that we claim to comply with. And they were very prosperous. Syria in 2010 was very prosperous. They exported pharmaceuticals to 100 countries. They were self-sufficient in agriculture. They were even starting to produce their own cars. Aleppo had over, I think, between 1,000 and 1,500 factories. And what happened when the so-called rebels came? They looted everything. I had a conversation with the leader of the industrialists in Aleppo, who is also an MP for Aleppo. And he said they even took the copper out of the walls. So there were huge trucks coming from Turkey, dismantling all the production equipment, even took the copper from the walls, so you can imagine. They stripped it, drove it to Turkey. And sometimes they offered them to buy it back. And this doesn't seem to me as being the acts of some random jihadist coming from here and there to fight for Islam. This is a very coordinated attack that must have been planned. You have to have the strategic, you have to have the logistics. And they also started to sell the oil. There were kilometers. When I was in Syria, we passed on our way miles of trucks with oil tanks. Because of the oil refineries, there were only 2 left in Syria. So I started to understand, wow, this is what happened when they stole the oil and drove it to Turkey. And this went on for months. Never heard about it before the Russians came in and said, well, look at this. And the Americans acted surprised. Oh, we didn't see that. And that seems strange, because they can actually count how many peas you have on your dinner plate. and they couldn't see this. So all these things, it gave me a very, very foul taste in my mouth, if I can use that expression. There is something strange going on here, and it's bigger than what we've ever seen before. And I wanted to go there and see for myself. And yeah.
The Defense Intelligence Agency report from 2012 that was leaked clearly stated that the alliances go in such a manner that you have Turkey and you have Saudi Arabia and Qatar together with us in the West. These are our allies. And in that Defense Intelligence Agency report, also Al-Qaeda in Iraq was stated as one of our allies, and also the Salafis.
Yes.
So this is like black on white. This is why everybody loves WikiLeaks, because whatever is hidden, and Judicial Watch and other groups that go after this type of information to expose political corruption, economical corruption in the Western system, it's very vital to have that. We also see that our closest ally in the region is Saudi Arabia and Qatar and other nations. So this is still a paradox to me, because we used to be, let's say, a Christian culture, or we used to say we were. We used to have other values. We didn't use to this extent let greed rule the day, and the injustice that it brings to the world scene makes you understand why so many in the Middle East now, it's almost hard to find anybody who will support the United States. It's a sad thing, because we are Westerners and we would like our culture to bring justice to so many. I think also this is why in the Scandinavian countries, and we're a part of this project now together also, there's so many among the people. This is what people in the Middle East don't understand. There's so many Westerners on the people level that see this now and completely disagree with the political elites.
They do, absolutely. And even in the United States, I follow quite a lot of blogs in the United States, and people are furious. But there is a open window, there's an open space, let's say, between having the urge to do something, to change something, and knowing what to do. So we need a whole new movement for peace and prosperity and justice, global justice. Because it's hard to know what to do. I think a lot of people, I can talk about my own home country, Norway, a lot of people feel this discomfort. They don't really know. They know something is wrong. They see our leaders do crazy things that are not at all in sync with what the people want, but they don't know how to change it. And in Norway, there is no discussion about foreign policy. Zero. It's silence. We have an election coming up. They're not talking about foreign policy at all. And Norway is heavily into different things in the world. For example, 60 of our best soldiers, special forces, are in Syria. Norway is part of an illegal invasion of Syria. I'm deeply ashamed about this, but I have no saying in this. So they do things without the will of the people. They don't care. And this is very important to understand, that our leaders, Norway, United States, most countries in the West, our leaders don't care about us. They don't wake up in the morning saying, what can I do for the Norwegian people today? They don't. I really don't think so. They are thinking about their international careers and how to be liked, how they can walk around and feel important, let's say at a NATO summit, for example, which for most people seem like a charade. When you stand and watch what they're saying, or listen to what they're saying, it's a charade. Because people in the world feel like brothers and sisters. I really believe that. And we are brothers and sisters. So we have to find some way for us ordinary citizens to act upon this will to make change.
This is also why we say thank God for a Judicial Watch. Judicial Watch looks closely at the Clinton Foundation and where the money goes to, and if any money goes out of that to and how that works. And they came out with a report some time ago that Norway, Saudi Arabia and Qatar are the 3 foreign nations that give most money to the Clinton Foundation.
Yes,
and we see
absurd.
it's hundreds of millions floating out of taxpayers' money from a country like Norway, which I address as the Qatar of Europe.
Yes.
Because we're a small nation, marginally so in the north of Europe, and we just happened to find the oil in the 70s. So we clearly understand why Americans come here all the time. You know, I mean, it's easy for us to donate hundreds of millions into different projects such as that.
Yeah.
And then on the next level, we all of a sudden, little Norway with 5 million people, get all the good positions like the General Secretary of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, and so many other Norwegians. All of a sudden they pop up everywhere. So we're part of this together with Saudi and Qatar, and I think we really need to get a national debate and debates in Europe as to how
Yes.
we're spending our money, because in the long run this backfires. Because you cannot go into other people's country and bomb their country to shreds and expect that nothing will happen to you. This is the danger in the situation.
Well, it's actually quite surprising that there are so few actions in Europe. We have been bombing other countries for decades. They must be very forgiving, because there's hardly any terror going on in Europe. It's very rare. It happens from time to time, but compared to what we're causing in other countries, it's nothing. You know, in a country like Syria, there are things like Manchester happening every day, every single day, many times per day. Just in West Aleppo, 15,000 civilians have been killed by terrorists. What were their names? What were their dreams? You know, I met one man. I was sitting interviewing an MP in a restaurant, and a man came in, and he stood up to greet him, and he said, "Oh, you know, he left Aleppo. His son, 10 years old, was at home studying when a rocket hit him, a missile hit him, and killed him. His 10-year-old boy, and they left. Now they're starting to come back to Aleppo, but this happened all the time in front of the restaurant where we sat one day, just a week before. Mortar." So, you know, they live this every day, and we don't hear about it here. Oh, it's rebels. And he asked me, was Osama bin Laden a rebel? Was the Paris attack, were they rebels? And of course we'll say, no, they're terrorists. Well, why do you call them rebels when they kill people here in Syria? And this is very important. It's a very deep moral question that we have to ask ourselves. You know, why are we using these double standards? Because it's tricking our mind. And the press is doing it for us, you know, they trick our mind. They call it regime. They call them rebels. These are not the right expressions.
I think we need to return to the Westphalia peace of the 1600s and look at what the respect for national sovereignty at
Yes.
that time, how it created peace in Europe. England was now allowed to have its own laws. I mean, Europe had been to wars
All
over
the time.
religion and all
Yes.
for 100 years, and France was now allowed to rule within its own borders, and to have a realism instead of idealism come out as a strategy for foreign policy, so that we will respect each nation's right to self-determine
Yes.
its own culture and to govern itself, that there needs to come a return to that. And I would like to say, remember the 1600s philosopher Edmund Burke, he said to the English at that time that if you do not treat your subordinate, the Indians, better, and if you do not provide justice, there will rise a force against you, and that force might be too big for you. And later so came the end of the British Empire. So justice is a very important element both in religion and in humanity.
Yeah.
Justice between peoples.
Absolutely. But I think a lot of people, when they hear the word national sovereignty, they think of nationalism, the aggressive type of nationalism, which is obviously not a good force at all. So I think there needs to be a clear up about these expressions, you know, that to have national identity doesn't mean that the majority will decide over minorities, because culture is not static. Culture is evolving all the time, and we get influence. I come from Norway. You know, when I was growing up, nobody had even heard about taco. And now Norwegians eat taco every Friday night. So we are enriched by learning about other people's culture and adapting them. Our national costumes, which are the most Norwegian thing you can find. They're all, every little piece, you know, every region have their own. It's very strict. You can only, there has to be in a certain way, but every little piece of them come from somewhere else. You know, somebody traveled to Morocco, they saw a beautiful material or some gold and this and that. So to have exchange, cooperation, understanding, respect, wonderful. But we cannot mess with other countries' politics. And what we have seen, all these so-called humanitarian interventions have all been fake. You cannot have a human intervention with bombs and guns and supporting the ever-present dissatisfied minority. In every country we'll find a minority which are dissatisfied. And a lot of time these minorities want to grab power and grab resources. They're not fighting for distribution sometimes, but a lot of times we've seen in Libya, Iraq, that's not the case. And if you fuel these dissatisfied forces with guns, intelligence, mercenaries from other countries, that's what they call human intervention these days. That's what we've seen in Libya, Syria, Iraq, and actually also in the Balkans and other countries.
Kari Jaquesson, famous TV personality from Scandinavia. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for also going to Syria and telling us a little bit about how it is to be Syrian today.